It's Wednesday, May 20th, 2020, and thanks for listening to this archive of Teaching American History's American Heroes webinar on Heroes of American Business. Today we focused on Henry Ford and Madam Jay Walker.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Sickinga, Executive Director of the Ashbrook Center. So glad you're with us today for another in our American Heroes webinar series. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us as we're in the third of that series today, talking about Heroes of American Business. This webinar series is part of the Ashbrook Center. We are an educational center located on the campus of Ashland University here in Ashland, Ohio. As many of you know who have been with us for this webinar series and other events, the mission of the Ashbrook Center is to strengthen constitutional self-government by educating our fellow Americans in the history and principles of our country and in the habits necessary for self-government. And so we want to welcome you as part of that. We certainly want to welcome our donors and supporters and friends, but also teachers who are with us today through our Teaching American History program, which is a project of the Ashbrook Center. It's an outreach to teachers and through them to their students, empowering them to help their students understand the history and principles of this country. So I want to extend a special welcome, as always, to the teachers who are joining us today. And we will be having this conversation, and really will be a conversation, as it always is, with the primary source documents and with the scholar who will be joining us, Dr. Jennifer Kean. And you know, we do this webinar in as much as we can in a conversational way, because at Ashbrook we really believe that education is not just about information, and definitely not about indoctrination, but about discovering the truth about America for yourself. And we do that through conversation with the great minds of the past, through conversation with each other in a back and forth. You know, as I've said many times, we base our programs on Aristotle's old idea, all people desire to know, but then we add, but they don't want to be told. They want to discover it for themselves. So we hope you'll join us in that conversation. Please feel free to send in your questions for myself and Dr. Kean as we go forward. I want to get to as many of those as possible, again, in the conversational flow that we're so used to. So again, thank you for joining us. This is really part of the Ashbrook way of teaching and learning that we value so highly, and we're glad you're with us. You know, we think of this as talking with the past, an opportunity to go back and talk to some really interesting Americans. In today's case, Henry Ford and Madam Jay Walker, to ask questions and of the past, to bring it alive and seek its answers. You know, questions like, what kind of character does it take to flourish and prosper and create the kind of companies and industries that these two amazing individuals did? Those are the kind of questions we want to ask of the past, because it can teach us so much. It can give us a historical perspective on today and the crisis and issues we face today. But of course, it can also simply renew our understanding of America and its principles. And we really believe in this series that you can understand a lot about the principles of America by looking at the character of Americans. And you can see that character at its best, and sometimes not at its best, in American heroes. They really show what heights and accomplishments ordinary people without long family history, people without fancy last names, ordinary people, what they can do if they're allowed to flourish. And so we want to take a look at a couple of those today and address that interesting and profoundly important question. This series, is delighted to have it as it's the third in our series. It's made possible by a challenge grant from a very generous donor. And I want to just thank that donor, and also thanks to those of you out there who have supported the series in helping us match that challenge grant. It's made possible what the kind of conversation we're having today with Dr. Kean. To introduce her today is a great friend and supporter of the Ashbrook Center, Mr. Jim Buchwald. Jim is the founder of Ariel Corporation, which is the world's leading manufacturer of reciprocating gas compressors, kind that are widely used in, for example, the natural gas industry. It's a world-class company, headquartered actually just down the road from Ashland in Knox County, Ohio. Jim started Ariel way back in the 1960s, but he started it with some really innovative and interesting ideas to how to improve on an industry and turned that company, as I said, into a world-class heavy capital goods company. So Jim is an entrepreneur himself. He knows what it takes to create this kind of industry-leading standard company. But even more than an entrepreneur, and he is a true American entrepreneur, Jim is a patriot. He loves his country. And as Abraham Lincoln once said of Henry Clay, he doesn't just love his country because it's his, he loves it because it's a free country. And he has been involved with the Ashbrook Center and our programs. Well, I think he started back in the 1990s. He's on our board at Ashbrook, and he himself personally knew John Ashbrook, the namesake of the center. But Jim's particular involvement with Ashbrook really started in earnest in 2013 when he came to Roger Beckett, then the executive director, and said to him, "It's our duty to take these Ashbrook programs across the country to teachers and to their students, to empower them to rediscover for themselves the history and principles of this country." You know, just like an entrepreneur, Jim believes in discovery and understands education to be that process of discovering the truth for yourself, and always insists that these programs are that we are honest brokers, that we bring these documents and ideas and debates to teachers and to students for them to discover for themselves and to come to their conclusions. So it's a real pleasure and an honor that Jim has been joining us in this endeavor. He is a really great supporter of teaching American history. He is a deeply thoughtful patriot and a wonderful friend to the Ashbrook Center and to our teacher programs. So Jim, thank you so much for joining us today and for introducing our guest scholar, Dr. Jennifer Kean.
Well, Jeff, thank you for that introduction. We must can that. I can use that to get entrance to a lot of places that wouldn't have me, and that was beautifully done. You did give me permission to add a little bit to the story of Henry Ford, and so I'll take that time in just a minute or two on that. The last time we visited the Ford Museum was about half century ago. I was just really getting Ariel Corporation started, and there was a nice room with a complete little machine shop, circa 1920s machine shop. All of the equipment beautiful, and I thought, my God, I wish I owned that 1920s machine shop. We could go a lot faster and cut a wider swath, and you know, I let it go at that. But the other day, I realized that I knew something about Henry Ford. He thought that creation, making things, was a great delight, and he wanted to pass that on to Edsel. Whether Edsel appreciated it or not, I have no idea. But there he is. Henry and I are far apart in time, and he was in consumer goods, and I am in capital goods, which I find much more comfortable. But we share some of these intense enthusiasms. So I am my job today that I have been given is to introduce Dr. Jennifer Kean, and she is a history professor, at Chapman University in California and is the dean of her college, the Wilkinson College. And I had commented, more or less to needle my friend Jeff, that she looks awfully young. And he whacked me upside of the head with her great accomplishments. She has been president of the Society of Military History. This is a woman, and very much barging into foreign territory successfully. She's authored books on World War I. She is an expert on the early 20th century. That I find to be quite interesting. She has numerous fellowships, and I always thought a fellowship was just a nice thing you say about somebody. But it turns out that a fellowship is money that is contributed to the person who will then use it to expand his investigation into the subject. In other words, you bet your money on a good horse, not on somebody who isn't going to get the job done. And she has very much demonstrated that we don't have to convince people of it. The people who had the money put it on her, and so that I find impressive. She has, aside from authoring books, articles, she has even done her part on television as an on-camera expert on her general subject. One of the most important things she does, to my way of thinking, is she is involved in Ashbrook's teaching program in the summertime, and I assume a few times around the country. This very magical thing that I said we have a duty to expand. She is a part of that, and not only is that important, but the fact is she was good enough to be accepted. Not everybody can do that. She is one of those very special teachers, professors, who can extract the thought processes and the learning from a group, and it is the case of teaching secondary school teachers. A tough job. So I hope, I say this now, I hope that if we have our classes this summer, that I will be able to come up to Ashland and talk to Jennifer and maybe even pull some strings and spend an afternoon in one of her classes. I do really look forward to that. She is, after all, a formidable person, and I'm proud to be able to introduce her. So there it is. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate that. Welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us. You were here for of course, the wonderful webinar we did on the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And today we're turning our attention to these heroes of American business. Maybe we can start, these are folks that certainly Henry Ford, a lot of people have heard of. Myself being a native Michigander, we know all about Henry Ford, or at least we think we do. And some people perhaps know a little bit about Madam C.J. Walker. There's a Netflix series on her now called Self-Made, which I've been watching. And so she's risen to some notoriety. I think it's even executive produced by LeBron James. So some famous people have gotten involved in that. But probably not too many of us know much about the lives of Henry Ford and Madam C.J. Walker before they got engaged in business and became successful and very famous. Could you just take us back to their earlier lives and talk a little bit about what they were like and what they were doing before they engaged in their business activities?
Yes, I got good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I want to say thanks for that introduction. That was wonderful. I've never been introduced that way before, and I think this is being taped, so I'm gonna hang on to that one. And I would just add that one of the really wonderful things that I've been invited to participate in is the Ashland summer program, and it is always the highlight of my year. I think this year it's going to end up being online, so it'll be a little new experience, but I'm definitely still looking forward to it. Uh, it's great to begin at the beginning with these two larger than life figures because for both of them, their early experiences and the hardships that they overcame, and also um, the way that the values that they later came to espouse were really instilled in them from these early experiences. I think it's really important to understand to see their influence. It's worth really noting that both of them became successful in their mid 30s. They were late starters. These were not um, people who, right from the beginning, were tagged as geniuses who were going to transform the world. They had to work hard to get where they were, and they had to overcome a lot of doubts. So in that sense, I think it may have occurred to many of you in thinking about these two figures that they were quite different, but I put them together because I think there are some amazing similarities. So just to quickly sketch it out, I mean, Henry Ford, again, I think as many people know, was born on a farm to a relatively prosperous family outside of Detroit. He did not like working on the farm, but he did like working on the farm machinery, and he was the eldest son. He had a fairly indulgent father who saw that he had this particular gift and allowed him often to work on the machines rather than do the heavy farm work. But that early life for Henry Ford instilled him with a few things, and one was a sense of just how hard farm work was, and also the sense of isolation that he felt. I mean, being in a rural community where transportation was difficult, that there really was this sense of being isolated from the rest of American life. And when you know the rest of his story, as we do, you can see that this really would be something that he tried to break down. But then on the other hand, he also felt that the strong community, the religious-based nature of it, the values of hard work, discipline, temperance, these were going to be values that he developed increasing nostalgia for over the course of his life, and in a sense almost tried to transport to the city and when he began opening up his factories. So he has a relatively limited formal education. He leaves school at 8th grade and then really just begins working on his mechanical skills. He moves to Detroit, and he works as a mechanic, and as we all sort of famously know, after he's married, has a son, spends his evenings in his garage working on his first prototype car, the quadricycle, which when he finally is able to display it and it works, gets some fame, gets some investors, and is sort of now on his path to being able to break into the automobile industry, which at the time is very competitive. There's lots of individual entrepreneurs being created, and as we know, begins on his path with Model T. Now, Madam Jay Walker, that's a little bit of a different situation for her. She is born 2 years after the end of slavery, 2 former slaves. She's their first freeborn child. She's orphaned very young, and she is working she grows up in Louisiana, where she's working in the cotton fields. After she's orphaned, she goes to live with a sister and her brother-in-law, who's quite abusive to her. And in order to escape this difficult living situation, she marries young, 14 years old. Within a few years, she's a mother, the only child she'll ever have, a daughter, and a few years later is widowed. And there's a lot of speculation as to how her husband dies. Some people have suggested that he may have died at the hands of mob violence, white mob violence, which was rampant in the South at that time, but the record's unclear. She immediately, in a sense, takes a pretty brave path for a single mother. She moves north. She moves to St. Louis, and here she becomes a washerwoman. And in this sense, her story is not unique. It's a story of of an African American woman, a single mother who has to make her way in the world, and there are only certain occupations that are open to her. She can be a farm worker, work in agriculture, or she can work either as domestic servant or in the least desirable professions available. And being a washerwoman at that moment was very undesirable. Sometimes with my students, I walk them through what it means to wash clothes in the late 19th century, and it's nothing anybody wants to do today. And as we sort of know, especially if you're watching the Netflix series, I mean, she remarries her husband. Her second husband does not turn out to be a great guy, and they divorce. And in through all of this and this hard work, she begins to start imagining a new life for herself, and things start turning around from her when she comes into contact with Annie Tumbo, who is selling hair growing products, and is first treated by her and then becomes one of her agents. And now she begins to imagine a new life for herself. And for Madison Jay Walker, what this early life really demonstrates to her is not just hard work and toil pays off, but also that a woman has to be able to financially support herself. That you cannot just put your fortunes in the hands of a husband or a man because it may not work out for you. And a lot of what she's doing is in terms of building her business and the story she tells about herself and the story she tells about her early life is to other women to say, I know how limited your opportunities are. I know how hard you're working, but I also know how much financial independence is going to matter to you. And that becomes a message of empowerment that is not just racially based, it's very gender based as well.
That's so interesting. So we get up to the point now, and maybe we can even put this in dates and years. When do we start? When did each of them start their companies? And I'm particularly interested in what is the event or moment that they each say, "Oh, I can build a company here. I can start manufacturing, whether it's cars or hair products." What is that event in their lives that we know of that really began that pushed them into business?
Right. Well, I think that for both of them, it's a little bit around the same time. I mean, for uh, Madam C.J. Walker, you're really looking at, the early 1900s. So 1903, she becomes an agent for Trumbo, and then she gradually, within a few years, begins experimenting with her own formulas. She learns the business model of, sort of commissioning agents to go out and sell a licensed product, thinking about personalized home care service. And she begins to think to herself, I could do this for myself. Why don't I just strike out on my own? And the Netflix series kind of paints that as these two women sort of duking it out. But the reality is there were numerous people doing this. This was not a unique business. There were a lot of people in the beauty care business. There were a lot of people, homemade concoctions were very common. If you look at Black newspapers of the time, you see tons of advertisements for these things. So there wasn't anything particularly disloyal about what she did or particularly unique about it in terms of who owned what and what was patented and was something really distinct. I mean, if you know anything about the patent medicine business at this time, it's kind of a free-for-all. So what she was doing was not, in her case, it was not really so much that, she did develop a good product, obviously, but the real brainstorm for her was that she could own her own business and she could strike out on her own, that she did not need to just be somebody else's employee. And then once she does that, and of course, by this time she's remarried to her husband, Walker, and he's very encouraging of that to her because he's a salesman and he has really a sales plan, a marketing plan, a way that her life story is so inspiring and so different that she can really utilize that in terms of growing this business. Now with Ford, once he has the quadricycle and he begins and he uses that as the vehicle for attracting investors, that this is the moment for him where this is a prototype Now, how can he begin to refine this? And the notion that, and then he dabbles in race cars. And in the section that I gave, you can see that he starts then from there, beginning to start that journey of creating the Model T, which is once he has money and once he has investors and he has exposure, then for him, really creating something new, which is this extremely efficient cost of a car that you can produce in a cost efficient manner that an average person can buy. That he sort of develops this, again, it's a very competitive car market. But his innovation is, I am going to market to the 95% of the population that that other car manufacturers are ignoring. That they just want the race car, the luxury car, the 5%, the sort of status symbol car. And I have a new conception of the kind of market we could create for the automobile. And so for him, that is sort of the moment where he creates his own company and begins on that path. But I would point out that both of them have trouble with the idea of their companies having investors that they are responsible to. Both of them want to control their product. They want to control their distribution networks. They want to control their employees. They want to be in control. And they started from nothing. They've built it up. And sharing authority, sharing control is, both of them will struggle with that. And Ford lives a long time, so we see that struggle very clearly. Madison Jay Walker, she dies in her 50s, but even in her 50s, she's starting to have problems within her company in terms of that kind of conflict.
So tell us a little bit about once they start then in the early, as you said, Madam C.J. Walker is sort of 1903, 1905, 1908. And that's about the same time as Henry Ford is getting underway. What are some of the obstacles or setbacks that they face early in their in trying to get these companies launched?
Right. So I think that for Ford, one of the like I said, one of the big obstacles that he faces is from investors who do not trust him in terms of what he's trying to accomplish and that his vision really is sound. And so he figures out a way to basically free himself of the need to actually respond to them. And by having that unilateral control, he's able to really push ahead with this vision he has. The obstacles that he has, and these are some of, I think, the things that make him so famous in terms of the innovations that he has, which is he develops, once the Model T is released and it's very popular and it seems like the idea that he has to market this car to the masses is paying off. The demand is so high that he's not able to produce the car in a cost-efficient manner to really deliver on the promise that he believes that he has. And so a lot of the obstacles that he has and the innovations have to do with the things we know about him: developing an assembly line, innovating in terms of trying to make the production process absolutely as efficient as possible. And in that, and then the $5 a day wage. And in all of these, he is flying in the face of orthodoxy, and he's suggesting now it's so common for us that it's hard to get back to the moment when this was considered revolutionary, and all the naysayers who told him this was not going to work. And so he, even by breaking down the production process into thousands of different parts and understanding every single step of the way, how could you make a man who previously had to walk 40 steps to complete each task now only walk 2? And how much time would that save you overall in the production process? And at what perfect height should the belt be moving so the men don't have to stoop or they don't have to reach too far? And all this minutia that he is not above getting involved in. In fact, this is his genius, is sort of thinking about all these levels of detail. And then the $5 a day wage, which to him has several components to it. I mean, one is a big industry problem of worker turnover, that these jobs are very boring, even without as the kind of assembly line process that Ford has, industrial work is hard. People get sick, they get hurt, they get burned out, they just don't feel like doing it. How do you stop worker turnover? How do you have workers have enough money so that you can actually they can actually buy your product, and also how can you ensure that you'll have some control over your workforce, make them loyal to you? And he uses the $5 a day for that. I think for Madam C.J. Walker, I mean, her real obstacles are sort of what I said before. She's entering into a very competitive market. And so how does she make her product stand out? How can it be different from everything else that's out there? And a few of the things and she also has to deal with a controversy within the African American community, which is that there's sort of a prejudice, especially among many of the race leaders, about what the beauty industry is really trying to accomplish. And is the beauty industry trying to make African Americans appear more white? That's the big controversy. There's a lot of criticism of skin bleaching products, for example, hair straightening products. Is this really about health and hygiene and setting yourself onto the path of more respectability, of a more professional look, of just a happier sense of being? Or are you trying to deny your ethnicity, your racial characteristics, and become more white? And she has to grapple with that. And you can see that I on purpose put in the readings article from the Emancipator, which was the newspaper by Tuskegee, so Booker T. Washington, because Booker T. Washington was Madam C.J. Walker's hero. He was the person who was espousing economic self-sufficiency as a method for racial progress, entrepreneurship, self-made men and women. And in her mind, she fit that to a T, and she really wanted his approval. But in the beginning, he kept her at arm's length because he was very critical of the beauty industry in terms of what was it actually trying to accomplish. And eventually she wins him over and gets his endorsement. The story goes that it's because she actually visited Tuskegee and basically gave his family, I don't know if you want to say like a beauty makeover, but basically treated their hair with her products, and they were convinced. But it shows that a lot of the things, even now, these cultural concerns that we have about certain segments of commercial industries were present there as well.
That's interesting. How did they each get? You mentioned that Ford, one of his great concerns, and her concern too, and this is something you see in entrepreneurs, it looks like, that they create this themselves. They have a certain insight that people around them just don't have. They see an opportunity that people don't see, and then they work fanatically to figure that out. But in the process, because they come to this insight and they create it themselves, as you said, they really need to have control over it fully, or they're not going to be able to sort of realize their vision. But immediately that gets into problems, right? Because you're going to have most people, and Henry Ford and Madam C.J. Walker don't start with startup capital. It's not like they inherit a bunch of money so they have their own money. They don't have their own facilities. They have to figure out how, you have to buy a land and build a factory, or however you're going to make it. You've got to find suppliers. You've got to find employees. Even just start with that. You mentioned startup capital. How did they, these people coming from obscure backgrounds, how did they find the money to just get going?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Madam C.J. Walker used her own money. I mean, she used the money that she, was sort of making from. So she's starting locally. She's starting small, and then begins to grow out. She's starting money from the money that she's making by the salon that she's opening, the mail order business that she's creating, the agents that she commissions. And what she does is we're kind of used to this model now, sort of like you think you go to a Tupperware party where there's a licensed agent, they're selling branded products, they're getting a commission based on what they sell, but the other products go back. And in that way, you've eliminated all these overhead costs for yourself. You're not paying people wages. You're not opening stores. You're not trying to have all that kind of administrative overhead that you have to pay no matter what, whether people are selling or not selling. So for her, if you have an agent and somebody is taking orders and then you produce to fill that order, right? You're not having to put any money up front. You're basically just producing in terms of what you sell. Now, as she gets bigger, they start putting out feelers into drugstores and kind of having more like standing inventories that they're going to be able to utilize. But in the beginning, she can grow her business in proportion to what the demand is. So in other words, she's sort of going that way. Now for Ford, he has very quick success. I mean, it's sort of like once he has his early investors, and so he is able to attract some capital. And as he has the success with the Model T, he's able to, he's able to basically rid himself of them. And then again, it's the question of being able to sow his own money back into his business. And that I think is also one of the reasons why it becomes hard for these people to really let it go, because they didn't disassociate their own financial well-being from the financial well-being of their companies that they created. And to them, they took all the risk. And so now as they get bigger and more successful, why should suddenly other people kind of, benefit from that if they are not willing to also put in the same amount of work, right? And that's kind of the ethos that they both are really progressing, that they believe in social mobility. They believe in making average people's lives better, both with the products that they're selling and the workers that they're employing, but only to the extent that those people put in a sense, the same dedication and the same amount of hard work that they did. And when they start feeling that people are not doing that, then they have no patience for them. So Ford, $5 a day, first of all, you had to qualify for that. That was not something that everybody automatically got. And qualifying for that depended on who you were. He creates this very famous sociological department that's going to go into workers' homes and sort of look at how they're living. Are you legitimately married? You can't take in boarders. If you don't speak English, you have to go to my Americanization school and learn English. No drinking. All sort of a whole host of things people have to do. And also, when you're in the factory, no talking, no sitting down, no singing, no whistling. Like you're here to work, right? I'm paying you this to work. Madison Jay Walker, when people come to her and say, why don't you just pay me a salary? She's like, well, what's going to be your incentive to work then? Right? I'm not going to pay you a salary. You're going to get commission. That's going to make you work hard. And then she has to also start fighting against imitators. One of the ads that I gave in the readings, if you look at it, it says only buy, right? This is what Madam C.J. Walker stuff really looks like. That's why you keep seeing those tins. It's sort of like only buy branded merchandise. Don't buy those counterfeit knockoffs. And she has to really push hard against sort of educating the consumer that you might think you're buying my product, but it seems too cheap. There's a reason for that. So I think, and with her agents too, there was a lot about them. They had a school, they had competitions, but they also had requirements: how they had to dress, how they had to present themselves, how they were expected to speak, how they were expected to live. You were selling respectability through these hair products. You were selling a better life and aspiration, but the agents, she felt, were representing her, and so they had to comport themselves in the proper way, and that was very, very important to her. And in that sense, you see that these entrepreneurs are also trying to cultivate workforces that are almost mirror images of themselves, or who they believe themselves to be and what they believe their life story to be. And on the one hand, that can be very inspiring, and but on the other hand, people are individuals, so there could be some chafing against paternalism, maternalism, the sense that is this really the kind of control that your employer should have over you?
That's interesting. And one of our attendees has asked a question connected to what we were just talking about, which is that was Madam C.J. Walker's direct marketing approach, essentially, with which we're now familiar, which was, but as you say, was not so perhaps familiar then. Well, is it because, was it born out of necessity? Was she unable to get her products for African Americans sold in mainstream stores, or did she think that that was a better business approach?
Yeah, no, I think it was born out of necessity, and then over time it became something that she became so connected to, or so convinced of, that when her business advisors, as she became more successful, began arguing that there should be franchises and that we should be selling direct to drugstores, that she actually resisted it, because what she argued was that it wasn't just direct mail order, it was also the personalized attention that agents gave to their customers. So the idea that you could have an agent like door-to-door sales, where somebody came in and demonstrated the product for you, or there be clinics that you could go to where you were shown, it's not just about slathering this on, but like, what's the best way to take care of your hair. That this was a kind of like personalized beauty service that was something she was offering, as well as just buying something in a tin. And the larger she got, and the idea of just picking it up at the drugstore, that removed that element of from the business model that she had. And I think that for her, the idea of, even where she located her businesses, so she was in Denver, and then she went to Indianapolis, and for a while she was in Pittsburgh, and she was looking for places that were transportation hubs. Where could she basically manufacture and then, get this stuff to? She was thinking the whole time about how to do this. The way she markets it is in Black newspapers, and this is because, quite honestly, that's the only place she has. White newspapers are not going to carry her product, and she's at this time now, she's so successful that white competitors start coming into this industry with personas that are fake, sort of other Madam this and Madam that are actually white controlled companies that are now coming in, realizing this is a business opportunity. And that's another part of her, only be authentic. And it's also part of her presence. So again, in the newspaper articles I gave, these are articles on her. She traveled all the time. Speeches she gave, the people flocked to see her. It's not who is Madam C.J. Walker? Does she really exist? Is she a real person? She travels extensively to connect with communities, and she goes to all the major Black institutions of any community, the churches, the fraternal organizations, the clubs. You see the schools. You see where she's actually doing her speaking. She's connecting to the community and being welcomed by these communities. She usually stays with a prominent citizen when she visits town, and so she's kind of becomes, over it's a very short period of time, like a matter of years, this celebrity in the Black community. So her coming is an event. And all of that builds, and it's a lot like Ford. I mean, Ford becomes a celebrity, and all of the car becomes connected to this story he tells about himself and his motivations and his dedication. And people like these stories because they see possibilities for themselves reflected in what these people have done. They're exceptional, but yet they're ordinary, and they paint themselves as ordinary people who are selling a message of hope and possibility, not just a product for you to buy. And that, I think, when you're talking about like what makes somebody what's the American character, and why are these stories are more than the products that people are purchasing. They're purchasing almost a value system at exactly the same time. And that's 20th century capitalism in America, right? It's about your identity being somehow shaped by the products that you consume.
Right.
And I love the fact that Madam C.J. Walker had a Model T, and she loved driving it around. I think it's
so they really are connected. Yeah.
They really are connected. But you know what he said about, like even a woman can drive it. It's like To her,
So
that was a big moment, right? That she could, that was independence to her. That the fact that she could drive around in her own car.
yeah, right. And it's interesting, right? Because they're in very different industries, but in some respect, as Jim was saying, he started a heavy capital goods company, but they're both in consumer goods, as
Yes.
we call it now,
Yes.
right? So in
Yeah.
some ways, their industries are very different, but in some ways, they're connected. And so they're thinking about how do you make this product and how do you sell this more than just a product, this
Yeah.
idea, this value, this hope. Um, eh, but some of the qualities that allow people to be successful entrepreneurs, as we know, some people out there, I like to watch Shark Tank, for example, that show, and people pitch the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But some of what we realize is listening to some of those investors who are very thoughtful about these things. They'll say they understand that sometimes some of the qualities that make someone a good inventor or entrepreneur don't translate into being able to run a company and build it successfully. Now, sometimes they do, of course, but sometimes they don't. There's a lot of stories of wonderful inventors who fail at running a company. And oftentimes there's this period of transition when the company gets going and gets big, as Ford and Madam C.J. Walker's companies do. Then there's this moment of, okay, where do we go from here? Do we rest comfortably in what we're doing and sort of let's be content with our market share and the way we're producing things now because it's too risky to try another innovation or something different? Or do we take another big step? Do we try to take another big leap and keep growing? And I just wanted to, I was struck by this line from Henry Ford, and I think it would apply probably to Madam C.J. Walker. I want your thought on this. This is from chapter 4 of his book, My Life and Work,
Yeah.
where he says, there's this controversy about his associates tell him, we need to be kind of flatten our growth here. And he says, if I had followed the general opinion of my associates, I should have kept the business about as it was. Put
Right.
our funds into a fine administration building, tried to make bargains with such competitors as seemed too active, made new designs from time to time to catch the fancy of the public, and generally have passed into the position of a quiet, respectable citizen with a quiet, respectable business. And it
Right.
seems like both Madam C.J. Walker and Henry Ford rejected that idea. I'm not going to be
Yes.
content with a respectable business in it being a quiet, respectable citizen with a respectable business.
Right.
Was there a
But
moment in their lives where they had to confront that and decided, no, I'm going to go continue on this risky entrepreneurial path?
Well, I think with Henry Ford, I mean, again, we have a longer view of Henry Ford in terms of how he handles his success and like what happens next than Madam C.J. Walker, who dies in 1919. And so kind of at the height of her popularity and, where she's really building out this network, we don't really know what would have happened next in the 1920s when, she may have faced similar problems that Henry Ford had, which was, 9 years in after the Model T, and in the 20s where consumerism is really now the new norm in terms of growth opportunities for American business, and people beginning to now want more choices, and they're you're seeing these companies have to diversify what they're actually selling. So both of them start with very clear visions, basically single products that they build their success on. And now as you begin to develop, with hair products, you need a multiplicity of things. And what should you branch out into? And Madam C.J. Walker's no longer alive. Her daughter inherits the company, and very controversially in the 1920s, the company decides to start selling skin lighteners. And this is something she would never have agreed to. It's meant to be part of this diversification of their products. But basically, by losing that single-minded focus and entering into very controversial products where there's more competition, you don't see that company flourishing in the same way that it did under her control. Now, would she have agreed to that? Would she have fought it? We don't know. But you could see that clearly the company also experienced new challenges after its initial success that it had to confront. And for Ford, we almost see the opposite happening. So in the 20s, late 20s, when when the argument is that the market for the Model T is basically drying up. There's more competitors on the scene. People want, his famous thing, my customer, the customer can have any color he wants as long as it's black. Now people start saying, well, maybe we don't want just black. And the person who's really innovating at this moment is his son. It's Edsel who's saying we need an updated car. We need to have a car that looks more modern, a car that people can order in different colors, that has more more amenities, and eventually Ford gives in. He shuts down for almost 2 years, retools, comes out with the Model A, takes credit for it, but it's really his son's invention. And Henry Ford almost never forgives his son for convincing him to pull the plug on the Model T, because to him, the Model T was the thing he did. This was his great invention. And that's a big turning point for Ford, because from that point on, you see him really becoming much more focused on bigger, better, more efficient, but also in building, again, he builds his big factory in River Rouge, more dehumanizing, less concerned about the overall welfare of his workers, more about just getting as much work out of them as possible, almost reverting back to everything that he had criticized in the beginning. And when you get to the 30s and you see all the labor conflicts within the Ford plant, and his problems with workers trying to unionize, and problems again with his son, that he's not able to sort of maintain that. There's a way in which he's taking risks by getting bigger and more efficient, but another way in which his son almost doing exactly what he had done earlier with the car industry, him resenting that innovation coming from somewhere else. And that's where Ford is such a paradox, because and I was saying earlier in our little preview conversation, it's almost like you've got to decide what period of his life you're talking about in terms of how you characterize him. Because there's some things that seem constant, but other ways in which he maybe believed his publicity about his own story a little too much. And this began to kind of shape even how he ran his business.
So we can see some of these, and some folks have asked this question. We see some of the shared qualities that Ford and Madison Jay Walker have as entrepreneurs, as really amazing business people, right? As you said, they see an opportunity where other people don't. Here's a product that I can make, or they see an opportunity to make it so much better than what other people are doing. They have a kind of insight into manufacturing that other people didn't have, how to make it, how to distribute it. And they have a certain kind of leadership, a kind of single-minded vision and focus that allows them to just plow through stuff, amazing obstacles and challenges that even Ford lays out in some of his work. That but then they also have some flaws.
Yes.
Heroes aren't perfect, right? They're flawed people. And some people have raised the question. We know, for example, Henry Ford has very unfortunate streaks of anti-Semitism, for example.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the flaws, perhaps, that each of these great entrepreneurs had, and what they meant for them and their company?
Right. So the only other thing I was going to kind of add to your list is that they had both known failure. And I think that, to me, when we're all probably thinking in our minds, what's the instruction here? I mean, when we look at these lives, what do they have to tell us? And we're in a society now, it's very failure adverse. I mean, failure means failure. But for these people, I mean, to think of them becoming who they were in their mid 30s. I mean, the Model T comes out, Ford is 40 years old. He's not a kid. This is not a quick success. This isn't the kid that creates an app at 18 and he's a superstar. And there's a lot of failure connected to this story. And nobody is, you think of who's the bottom of the social economic ladder. Black women, that's the place they occupy in American society. And so the fact of Madam C.J. Walker becoming, many people believe, the first Black female millionaire in American history. I mean, that's incredible. It's an incredible story for her. I think with Ford, again, I mean, the flaws are more evident because of the longer life that he leads, and definitely the anti-Semitic tirade that he goes on post World War I, early 20s period, when he buys the Dearborn Independent, and he begins to use this following that he's created and this network that he has, showrooms to sell his cars, to basically now to translate that into, he knows the right way to live, and he knows who's to blame for the problems that he's having and for any problems that the country is having. And a lot of his problems have had to do with financing and with his investors, and to him, pulling up old tropes about Jews and Jews controlling the Wall Street and controlling the financial markets. And, he even calls it, right, the world problem, the Jews. So he's shut down because of an anti-defamation suit that's filed against him, and basically he's going to have to go to court, and he ends up issuing an apology. And it's because of kind of people pushing back at him that he dampens that, although obviously those are views that he holds his entire life. And I think the other part that's problematic with him is that he expected his workers to be grateful to him for the jobs that he was giving, for the way that he was straightening out their lives, for the way that he was ensuring that they were in reasonably safe working conditions. And so any sense of ingratitude, like people wanting to have a union, wanting to have a say on shop floor rules, to him that's ingratitude, and he just couldn't understand it, and he was not collaborative. I mean, he was always in control. Even with his own son, he could not develop a collaborative partnership in terms of how he operated. And I think that those were probably flaws that he always had. And then his success and his wealth allowed those to kind of dominate him. Madam C.J. Walker, while I think she definitely had some of those same desires to, control her business, I actually think, and I'm projecting here, but her life was actually going in a different direction. What you see her doing with her success is really connecting herself strongly to the African American civil rights movement. And she becomes very invested in philanthropy, and actually is not afraid to at the time take controversial stands that could have certainly created a white backlash against her. Now, it's not going to hurt her business interests because she's not marketing anything to white consumers. She's marketing to the African American consumer, and in some ways, those stands then help her. But I did include also some of the things in terms of her donations. They keep talking about this $1,000 that she gave to the Indianapolis YMCA. That's the kind of donation that nobody was giving in the African American community at that time. I mean, people had white benefactors that were coming in, like Julius Rosenthal and Rosenwald and others, but Madam C.J. Walker, the fact that African Americans could donate to their own philanthropic endeavors, and that amount was again noteworthy and admirable. She signs the petition protesting against lynching in the wake of the East St. Louis race riot. She's part of the delegation that goes to present that petition to Woodrow Wilson. I mean, she is talking about the racial violence and racial discrimination and the need to address that, and using her celebrity status to bring attention to those causes. And in that sense, she was getting more and more involved in those issues, not less, as she went on. And again, it's impossible to kind of know where that was going to end up. And there are debates within the African American community at the time over what is the right process for pushing civil rights forward. But there's no doubt that she was investing herself in that kind of collective struggle, not just thinking about building her personal empire.
That's fascinating. And some folks might want to know, we know what happened to Ford and his company. For the folks listening out there right now who have, I'm sure, Ford cars, what happened to Madam C.J. Walker's company? Did it transform into something else, or after her daughter took over, was that the end?
Well, no, it keeps going. I mean, the company's not. It goes all the way into the 1980s, so the company still continues, and her daughter runs it, and for a certain amount of time, her daughter doesn't run it forever, but over time, the company the family loses control of it, and it becomes, it's sold. It becomes sold out of the family hands, I want to say. And um, it becomes a little more diversified, a little less specific. I mean, you don't have her story anymore that's really going to resonate with people in the 1930s, the 1940s. I mean, so the company still exists, but it's not a company anymore that has such a direct connection to her in terms of the actual story that she represents. And and I think that the competitive market opens up as well, and so that makes it a little less distinctive in terms of the products that it's selling. So it staggers along, but it's not defining of the industry anymore, say in the same way that Ford Motor Company is. Although, as you point out, Ford also now had to compete and had some of its own problems from the that it created in itself. But things that happened along the way in 20th century American history that sort of helped the car industry didn't necessarily help the beauty industry. Things like the war, or working on government contracts, or things like that really promote the auto industry. Creating the interstate highway system. I mean, all these things that really make that such an important backbone of our economy. The beauty industry has a different trajectory.
Well, this is fascinating. Thank you, Jennifer. It's amazing. Our time is through. It went by so fast, as it always does,
always does.
Talking with you. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. What a fascinating glimpse into two really remarkable human beings and Americans, and their success and in business, and their struggles, and their ability, as Jennifer said, to fail and to continue on and to overcome. What an amazing characteristic, and I think a great lesson for us, as Jennifer said today. I want to thank you all for being with us. For additional information, resources, please check out ashbrook.org, as always. And if you're a teacher, or if you're a student out there, or a parent who's doing schooling now with your children and want some more primary source documents of the kind that Jennifer had us look at today, check out teachingamericanhistory.org, TAH.org. It's a wonderful website with all kinds of primary source material for you, great historical documents that you can take a look at. As I said before, this is the third of our four in the series on American heroes. Next week, we're going to be talking about heroes of American medicine with Dr. Eric Pullen, and we're going to be talking about Claire Barton, the founder of the Red Cross, and Jonas Salk, of course, the discoverer of the polio vaccine. And that's such a important and interesting topic, even for today, in the race for a vaccine. What does it take to treat the sick, and what does it take to find a vaccine that can cure sickness? Really important and interesting topics. So we'll get a lot of insight from Dr. Pullen on those questions too. After this, you'll receive an email that will allow you to, this has been recorded, as Jennifer said. You'll allow, please send it out, this recording, to your friends, to your family, to your children, grandchildren, anybody who might be interested. We love to have these webinars put out to as wide an audience as possible, to help people to rediscover these really interesting and important figures like Henry Ford and Madison Jay Walker. It's our goal here to learn a little bit from history, to get some historical perspective on the issues today. We hear a lot about heroes today. What can we learn about heroes? We learn, things like that freedom can really unleash energy and creativity and enterprise and courage of the kind that we saw in people like Henry Ford and Madam C.J. Walker. That heroes can be flawed, but they can still accomplish amazing things. And I hope it renews our understanding of America and our principles in history. It gives us a sense of our shared story that we have together as Americans. So thank you for that. I hope it is insightful and hopeful for you. And as always, thank you for being here, and stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay connected with Ashbrook. Thank you very much.
Thanks again for listening. You can learn more about our programs, our webinars, and our documents-based resources, as well as our documents library at teachingamericanhistory.org or just TAH.org.